So she asks me, "Are you famous?" That happened last week. We were in a clothing store, and she peeked her head out of the dressing room and asked me this question. And I said, no, I'm not famous. But she still persisted, like I was lying about it. "Well, you seem like someone who was famous." Thank you. I was flattered, of course, but I was curious about why she was so insistent about asking me that question. So I was talking to a girlfriend of mine about it later, a very wise woman in her 70s, and she told me something that was pretty profound. She said, "You don't see yourself the same way other people see you, because you still see yourself as Sharon." That reality check was profound for me. And who is Sharon? Well, that's the S in the S, Renee Mitchell. I dropped my first name when I moved across country to attend college on a full ride scholarship. I was 17 and was ready to make my own decisions about my own life. But I kept that first initial to remind myself of where I had come from. It's a journey I'm still trying to figure out. And despite the things that I've accomplished, most of us see ourselves through our imperfections, as I did with that question about being famous, while other people, looking from the outside, see us through our strengths. And my hope is that by sharing a little bit of my journey with you tonight, that we will see a little bit behind the curtain, the public facade that I show you that makes it seem like I have it all together. But maybe, just maybe, as you learn more about me, the real me, through the poetry I share and my life experiences, you can find some commonalities that can help support you on your journey, or even provide a hint at the challenges that other people are dealing with, strangers or even friends or clients who may need a word of encouragement, a shoulder to lean on, or a kind gaze, and a smile to help guide them toward resiliency. Are you with me? Okay, please respond by saying, "I see you." Let's start with the first photo. So, actually, let me go back a little bit. My dad. My story begins, that I'm going to share with you, begins at age 4. So I'm a middle child. I was sandwiched between 8 children and a miscarriage within a span of about 9 years. I was a sad and moody child. I always felt overlooked, unseen, and so I'm going to share a poem with you that I wrote that's called Invisible. At home, I am brown-skinned, knock-kneed, and sullen. She looks like me, this girl in the bathroom mirror, hurriedly scraping her teeth across her gap-toothed smirk. I run 2 blocks, skip every other stair, and then I walk slowly as to not draw ire. I sit at my desk in my classroom in the front row, wiggling my hand like it is on fire. Ooh, 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 I know. I see my teacher, white-haired, grandmotherly. Same birthday as mine. I smile even wider this day. Then the dance begins. First, her eyes avert away from mine, and then her legs shift around my yawning absence, as do the students who look like her. They repeat this dance every day, every one of them, in the classroom, on the playground, in the lunchroom. I decide I must check out that mirror again, just to make sure I actually exist. See, in that store about a week ago, I was a version of that Sharon all over again, uncomfortable with flattery, nervous about the rug being pulled from under me. In that moment, I viewed this compliment from a stranger as an oversized jacket that didn't quite fit. So let me dive a little deeper into my backstory. I was raised by a mother who was raised by Catholic nuns after her own mother dropped her off at a convent in Wisconsin from Arkansas to protect her from the men who could not control their sexual urges. So by the time she was 12, my mother never spent much time with her own mother or her younger siblings, whom I've never met. And the trauma that my mother never healed from was the trauma that was eventually transferred to her children. I took on a lot of emotional baggage that really did not even belong to me, yet I learned how to claim it like it was my own. So my emotional baggage began really early. You see, here are the things that I wished I had been told, but what I really heard was something quite different. And looking back, I can't recall one moment of my childhood where I was genuinely happy, except when I was by myself, making up imaginary worlds with my hand-me-down dolls, or reading a book, or writing a story, or drawing a picture. These creative moments were some of the few times that you would catch me smiling. And that's because I was teased so much about the gap in my teeth, which I inherited from my father. And it wasn't until I was much older that I realized how many more attributes that were also similar to my dad. My father, Leroy Ward Mitchell, was a well-known community activist in Northern California, and he was the family breadwinner. As a college professor, he took students to visit Africa. He was also a writer, an artist, a creator, and my hero. He died unexpectedly, though, when I was 11 years old, because doctors refused to treat him, a black man, in their white hospital. So we later learned that he had a blood clot that started in his leg and moved up and stopped his heart. So grief and trauma were constant companions. It wasn't after his death, which I was never really able to grieve from. My mother moved us from Northern California to rural Newburgh, where the KKK had a historically strong foothold on the town's politics. There were nervous school officials who held a community meeting to announce that they would have black students, all from one family, integrating their their elementary, middle, and high schools. It was not a fun place to try to learn. At age 14, my freshman year, I was beat up by a football player, a popular senior, while my teachers and the rest of the students in my homeroom class looked from the window, and he was never disciplined for that. At age 15, on my way to Portland Community College to take classes that would help me graduate at age 16 like my two older sisters did, I was hit by a speeding car while standing on a sidewalk. Initially, the emergency room doctor wanted to cut my leg off. It had completely snapped in half from the impact of the stolen car from a 14-year-old girl who had been drinking with an older guy. I remember when they wheeled me into surgery, I kept shouting, "Check for blood clots, check for blood clots," because 3 years after my father's death, I still hadn't processed my grief. And I had years of multiple surgery to heal the physical wounds, but the emotional and the psychological wounds remained. And even though I was in the hospital for about 3 months, I still managed to graduate early from high school at age 17, mostly because I wanted to get the heck out of Oregon, which I thought was the most racist place ever for my experiences. And although my teachers insisted I was not college material, I received a full ride scholarship to a predominantly black college in Florida, where I majored in journalism. And it was the first time I had ever been exposed to a black teacher. He treated me like family. However, I was still shy, I was still insecure, and I was very, very naive. I was kidnapped in my first semester by an adult stranger and sexually assaulted. And afterward, other students assumed I was arrogant because I didn't talk that much. But it was really because I was still shell-shocked from the smell of fermenting grief. I made very good grades, but I had very few friends. And my friend was my pen, and we got along very, very, very well. I excelled in the one thing I knew how to do really well, which was write. And I became a columnist for the Oregonian. And eventually, I divorced my first husband, and I moved back to Oregon with my 3 children from Detroit, a daughter and twin boys. And eventually, I became the columnist, where I was nominated for the Pulitzer. I also completed my master's degree from George Fox University in Newburgh. I was successful in my journalism career, but I was really just a shell of myself. I was productive, but I was completely overwhelmed and very depressed, except when I was writing. So I had an amazing career as S. Renee, but ultimately I hadn't really escaped from the emotional broken clutches of Sharon. She still desperately wanted to be seen and heard and loved. So instead, I ignored my inner child who needed to be validated, who needed to be nurtured, and ended up marrying another man who was emotionally and verbally abusive and escorted me to the edge of a nervous breakdown. And after that second divorce, in order to process what I had experienced, I wrote and performed a play, I wrote a novel, recorded a CD, all called Tangoing with Tornadoes, that made my pain sound poetic. And all those years of running from my unprocessed trauma finally caught up with me. After I got divorced for the second time, I was in a very, very deep depression. I needed to get grounded in the creative spaces that I loved so much as a child. And so eventually, I quit my job at the Oregonian, to many people's surprise. And I began to write again for myself. I wrote plays, including the city's first jazz opera. I began to paint, sold 14 paintings in my first show, never painted before. I made jewelry and clothes, but I still wasn't whole inside. I also worked in schools as a teaching artist, and I encountered a number of Black and brown children who reminded me of myself as an elementary school student, shy, insecure, wanting to be seen. So I wrote and illustrated a children's book based on my own childhood, and I taught children songs to remind them of their courage. If I could be brave, I could change the world. And then 10 years after I left the Oregonian, I was recruited to teach at Roosevelt High School. At the time, it was the state's most diverse high school. And for years, I was the only Black teacher. And it was at that school in North Portland where I recognized that the trauma that I had experienced almost my entire life was what a lot of the youth were also being replicated in their lives, and they needed someone to see them. So one of the young ladies that I met at Roosevelt reminded me so much of myself. She was a middle child enveloped in sadness. Her name is Justice. And like me, she was told she was not college material. And it was partly because of her and these two other young ladies at Roosevelt that I found what is now a nationally winning youth empowerment program. And eventually I quit my job as a teacher to pursue my doctoral research at the University of Oregon, focusing on developing I Am More to provide culturally relevant social emotional learning and leadership building. And my organization has been operating since 2019, but last year received almost $1.5 million from the City of Portland, Myra Memorial Trust, Oregon Community Foundation, among other grantors, in order to build leadership in Black youth, which research documents is the most prodigiously traumatized adolescent group ever. It's still a work in progress. To be clear, this path steered me in this direction was grounded in my own trauma and my desire to have my life mean something. So I took my trauma and I gave it a purpose. And because I started to recognize my own trauma through my work with other people's trauma, I started to heal in the process. See, we're all a compilation of the stories that we tell ourselves based on our life experiences. And until we start to acknowledge the existence of past trauma, The wound of it festers below our awareness until it shows up as a mental health issue, such as anxiety or depression, or a health problem, such as high blood pressure or a stroke. We can't forever ignore the roadblocks on our way toward healing. We have to fully feel the feelings in order to heal our hidden wounds. So why is this important? Because trauma unhealed is trauma transferred. Transferred from parent to child, from sibling to sibling, from teacher to student, from one race to another. All pain, every act of violence, every encounter with road rage, every fit of anger, every attempt to dehumanize another person's humanity all stems from the same place: hidden and unhealed trauma. See, we're all serving as mirrors to someone else's pain. And once we start to recognize that, we can stop taking it personally when a teacher, a sibling, or a neighborhood bully tries to belittle you or destroy your confidence. That person, what I've learned from my research, is only reflecting what is already inside of them that hasn't been healed. Yes, hurt people, but healed people can also heal people. And isn't that what Morrison's mission is all about? Serving thousands of children every year. Sad children, neglected children, children who don't understand their own worth, children who, like Sharon, have the potential to find their voice and become their own superhero. If I could be brave, if I could change the world. So all children that you serve and you care about have the potential to be more than the Sharon that they are, and be something all of us have deserve a chance to be seen, to be cared about, to be healed, and to be loved. We are not here as adults to save them. We are here to liberate them, to give them hope, to offer reasons to not just stay alive, but to live their lives to the fullest, to see their own potential within themselves. So that day that the woman asked me if I was famous, she saw something in me that in that moment I wasn't seeing in myself. She saw a light from within, an inner peace, from walking through an intentional path toward healing, a standing tall even when my toes are scared. She saw all of that inner confidence and equated it with fame. But what was really there was a healed heart radiating from the inside out. So as part of my healing process, I wrote this poem that I'm going to share with you about my inner Sharon. I encourage all of you to take the time to see the desperately wounded child inside of our own selves and love that child into healing, so that you set an example for the children who are in most need of your wisdom. And this is just as important. Hold grace for the adults in your life too. Some of us, like me in that moment at the clothing store, get so distracted by our doubts, our fears, our traumas, our worries, that we don't feel worthy enough to receive a compliment. We don't always feel worthy enough to even receive something kind, even though inside we are desperately yearning for that kind of love and approval. So hold grace. Hold grace for other people, whether children or adults, even people who are acting badly. Again, the people you meet that get on your nerves the most might be so lost in their unprocessed pain and internal suffering that they are showing you by their behavior the fear that hides inside of them, the loneliness, the rejection that they have already experienced and haven't healed, the grief that they haven't figured out how to let go of. So when we receive grace, like that woman in the store gave me, a reminder of something greater than the version of myself that was in my head in that moment. And it is only when we know better that we could do better. So I close with this poem titled, Someday. Hey, you, with your head down, lip poked out like it's sweeping the floor. Why do you care so much about what they have to say? They're not talking about anything. They haven't even read your dictionary. They don't know. Ugly, stupid, clumsy. That doesn't define you. One day, you're gonna find the world holding its breath, waiting for your words. One day, they're gonna wish they called you friend. If I could be brave, I could change the world. If I could be brave, I could be like Dr. Martin Luther King. If I could be brave, I could change the world. If I could be brave, I can be and do whatever that I dream. Be brave. Thank you.